Hi guys, how's it going? Ivano here, back with another tier list, and today we're going to be ranking all of the DPS classes in the game based on their AOE potential. For those guys that want to skip to the end, here's a preview of the tier list. Now to quickly explain how this works, I basically ranked all the classes based on the maximum potential damage they can do. If the player is decent, if you're playing in a war zone, and you're playing against somewhat competent enemies who are not instantly dying. And then the second factor that went into this ranking is also how easy it is to get the damage off. So without further ado, let's jump into the tier list. Since I got the feedback that the last one was a little bit long, we're going to try to be faster today. At the bottom of the list in D tier, I have Concealment. Not much needed there, basically just doesn't have any good AOE attacks that do any actual damage. I mean, what are you going to do? A Noxious Knife rotation, spam Toxic Haste? Yeah, so theoretically you can take that Volatile Substance AOE tactical, but even then, I mean, those juicy 40k AOE crits are not going to carry you. So Concealment, yeah, pretty terrible when it comes to AOE damage. Another class that was very high up in the single tier, in the single target tier list, but is not that good in AOE is Deception. So D tier for Deception. A pretty similar thing compared to Concealment. I wasn't really sure which one is the worst spec out of those two. They're both basically terrible. Deception doesn't have anything for AOE, so yeah, sure, Lacerate, you can spec into Severing Slash as well, but both of them are just really bad. They are both white damage, it's terrible. Don't do this. If you want AOE, play something else than Deception. Next up, we have Carnage. Carnage is the same thing. You just don't have any good AOE attacks at all. I guess you can spec into AOE Gore, but why would you really do that? It's just not that spectacular at all. Yeah, you do have Sweeping Slash baseline, and that triggers your Taru form, but that's all there is. It's a melee attack, and the potential is not that high. So Carnage is also in D tier. Now, when I talk about those D tier specs, this would be specs that even in a good AOE game will maybe break the 10k barrier, but are going to struggle to ever go above 15k using their AOE attacks. So this is kind of my definition of D tier. It's just very terrible. In C tier now, this would be specs that you can expect in an AOE farm game to do more than 15k damage, but you would struggle to break the 20k DPS barrier. So at the bottom of the list, I have Arsenal Merc. And for those of you that have seen my recent 15k on all classes challenge, I did it with Arsenal, which was nice because I don't know how to play IO at all. And the way I did it on Arsenal is using the new AOE tactical, which is called Gyroscopic Stabilizers. And what you do there to get some meaningful AOE is basically just spreading Tracer Missile on all targets using that that talent in the tree that gives you the AOE Tracer. Then you're using the AOE Heat Seeker, which is nice talent. And this tactical will make it so that your Death from Above has a lower cooldown and does way more damage. Still, I mean, Arsenal AOE, yes, you can break the 15k. I think you will really struggle to get higher than that, to get to 20k. So it's not as bad as some of the D tier specs, but yeah, definitely not higher than C tier. Above Arsenal, I would put the Annihilation Marauder right now. Annihilation, yes, it has a dot spread, but then again, it's a melee dot class, which kind of makes it hard to get that off. The only thing why I would probably put it above Arsenal on some of these lower D tier specs is a tactical called Malmural Mask, or at least I think something like that. Which makes it so when you use Annihilate on a target with Force Rend, then Annihilate will do an AoE hit around them. And that actually doesn't do that bad of damage. So that's why I think, 15k should be possible on Annie in AoE situations. But it's not that easy to get it off. Next up, Fury Marauder. Fury Marauder, maybe. Yeah, some people will see it differently. I think in AoE, it's just not that great. Long gone are the days of smashers reigning supreme and auto-critting everybody for a third of their health. Nowadays you can be happy if you even get a 50k smash in. And yeah, what else do you have for AOE? You do have the level 23 talent, I think it's called Subjugate, which makes your Raging Burst an AOE as well. It gives it a little bit more potential, but it's not crazy. So Fury Marauder, I mean, maybe it's possible to get a 20k AOE game still. I haven't seen it though, so that's why I think it's not in B tier currently. Since in B tier I will have specs that can definitely break the 20k barrier. So if you're a Fury Marauder god and you're showing me a 22k DPS game using AOE, then I'll stand corrected. But for now, Fury remains in C tier. Next on the list was the best spec for single target. It's the Rage Juggernaut, which is actually very similar to Fury when it comes to AOE. It also has the Raging Burst AOE option that you can spec into. Something I forgot to mention actually with Fury that's also true for Rage is both can play the Enrage Crush tactical, which gives it a bit more potential, but in most games I think it's just meh. Enrage just doesn't do that much damage, and yes, it's a little buff to your AOE, but then your single target will not be SOP anymore. So I'm not a big fan of this either. So Rage, I think it's in a similar spot than Fury. It's not the worst AOE in the world, but it's never going to dominate like some of those higher specs. Last spec in C tier would be the IO Merc. IO Merc does have some AOE potential. It does have the Thermal Detonator AOE, level 39 talent. On level 23, you can spec into the AOE Incendiary Missile. You have a dot spread with Fusion Missile, and you have that tactical called Continuous Fire, which makes it so your sweeping blasters tick all your dots and refresh them. And I think this actually has some pretty good potential, even though I've never seen anyone pull off a really crazy game with it. But I would rate it currently above Fury or Rage, for example. Yeah, but again, it's not great. I think it will have some energy issues as well. So not a great spec, C tier, but with some potential. Moving to B tier. Now, B tier would be specs that definitely can break the 20k barrier, but I think will struggle to do more than 25k. So at the bottom of the list, I have NG. Now, NG Sniper, it does have the EMP Discharge AOE, which unfortunately is really its only heavy hitter when it comes to that. Plasma Probe is nice, but in the current meta where everyone has so many jumps and hypermobility, people will just run out of it eventually, so you're never getting the full damage off. And yes, you have your free frag grenade, but I mean, that's not crazy damage either. You have Orbital Strike, but again, Orbital Strike is not as potent as it used to be back in the day. And Suppressive Fire hits pretty hard, but you're not going to sustain it, and it's not as crazy as in Marksmanship, for example. So Engineering, yes, you can do 22k DPS if you have a really good AoE game, but I think you would struggle to hit anything more than 25k with it. So for me, it's a solid spec, somewhere in the middle of the pack. Not great, not terrible, B tier. Next in the list, Virulence Sniper. Now I would slightly put this above Engineering, even though it doesn't have the most AoE damage, simply for the reason that it's very easy to spam your dot spread and just dot everyone. Suppressive Fire, you can use it because Virulence has pretty good energy regen when it does damage with the dots it has on everyone. But yeah, Orbital as opposed to Engineering is not baseline Virulence. I think you need to spec into it and then you lose Phase Walk or Ballistic Shield. So Virulence, it definitely can do 20k DPS, I think. But much more, I think, will be hard for it. So I think it's a close contender with Engineering. Maybe in a perfect game, Engineering could do more. I think on average, though, and Virulence is easier to get off the damage because it's a range dot spec. Next on my list, Pyro PT. Pyro PT does have a bunch of good AoE abilities. It has Searing Wave, of course, which is your dot spread for Incendiary Missile. It has the Whistling Birds talent, which just improves that ability. It has the Flaming Fist AoE. And also your Flame Sweep triggers the your Cylinder, which does a lot of damage if people are stacking. And then it has the Tactical that, of course, makes everything auto-crit. Superheated Fuel, I think it's called. Plus, it has the option to swap tacticals if people are really stacking and use explosive weaponry. which makes all of your single target abilities cleave basically and just hit twice. And that's really good. But then again, Pyro has gotten some nerfs recently and suffers a little bit from the fact that Searing Wave is not the best AoE ability in the game. So it's frontal cone, the cone is pretty small, and some of those specs that will be coming in A and S tier simply just have bigger AoEs. So Pyro, well, I think it has good potential. It definitely can hit the 25k if we have a perfect game. I think there's just some specs that have higher damage potential overall and also an easier time to get that damage off. Next one, this one might be controversial, but people that are watching this channel know, of course, that I'm an Advanced Prototype Enjoyer. So I'm putting Advanced Prototype at the top of B tier and above Pyro. Why? So AP has a couple of AoE options that some people don't really use that much or are not aware of because its single target burst is, of course, the number one crazy thing about the spec. But the AoE is actually decent as well. So with the Flame Detonation Tactical, your thermal detonator explodes in an AoE around your primary target. And while it doesn't do full damage, it's still a lot of damage. And I think it hits up to 8 targets, which is pretty crazy. Then you have Deadly Onslaught, which is decent. It's not the best AoE ability in the game, but does some decent damage. Part of it is elemental as well. You have Shatter Slug, which is another decent AoE on 8 targets. You have Reflective Armor, of course. So if you're in an AoE circ, that just that talent alone can sometimes do 600, 700 DPS, which is crazy, passively when you get hit with other AoE. And then finally, you do have Retracted Refresh, which I think is the level 23 option. That makes it so when you refresh your bleed, you will trigger AoE damage around your primary target. And this one is actually crazier than people know. Even just with this talent alone, you can probably hit the 20k mark. In fact, I've seen that recently. And this one is crazy. I might do a video on exactly how that works a little bit later. But the potential is there. And with Flame Detonation and all of these other AoE options, I mean, I had a couple of 20k plus games. I've seen a 25k game on AP already. So it's definitely possible to get there, which is why I rank it at the top of B tier and above all those other specs. Moving on, A tier. Now, A tier would be specs that can do around 25k DPS or even more in a perfect scenario, but probably will struggle to hit the 30k DPS mark. Now, at the bottom of the list for me, I have Hatred. Hatred has the double death field, which is nice, which gives you armor pen if you spec into it. It does have the 2-time trouble tactical, which procs of lacerate, and you can spread your dots with it. And the potential is there. I mean, if you get a really nice stack of melee players, you can do 20k DPS pretty easily. I mean, it doesn't even need to be a good game. And I think in a perfect game, you can hit the 25k with Hatred. But I think probably not the 30k. And another reason why I would put it at the bottom of A tier is that the damage is, I mean, it's not that easy to get off simply because Lacerate doesn't have the biggest radius. And while it's AoE around you, yeah, again, not the easiest to get off. It's also wide damage, so I guess you can miss it. But you can spam it and it will always refresh your dots, which is super nice. Next on the list, a spec that's even better and where I already have seen, 25k plus games, 26, 27, 28k, is Madness Sorcerer. Now, Madness Sorcerer struggling a little bit in the single target department, but since it's gotten the new tactical called Killing Field, which makes it so your Demolish goes AoE, or basically affects all your targets that have a death mark on them, Madness AoE is pretty insane, actually. Basically, how it works is you spread your dots using the AoE death field, of course, and then you spec into the talent that gives your death mark a chance not to be consumed. Basically, you want to have death mark on everyone. You get your proc with Force Lightning, and then the AoE on Demolish is actually an 8-meter range, which is pretty nice. Demolish, of course, being your hardest hitting ability on Madness, having it AOE, it's actually insane. So Killing Field, the tactical alone, I think for me catapults Madness into A tier. 25k plus games definitely possible with this spec. Moving on, not many specs left. In A tier, second position, I would put Marksman Sniper. This might surprise some people, but I think that's just because no one is really playing Sniper because the spec has a lot of weaknesses in single target and survivability. Also, engineering just being better overall. But I think when it comes to AOE, Marksman takes the crown out of all the sniper specs, which is interesting because the concept of engineering is, engineering is supposed to be the AOE sniper. Marksman is supposed to be the single target, kind of assassin-y, really sniper class. But actually, Marksman had the best AOE out of the three. So how does it work? It basically works because of passive, which Marksman gets at level 1, I think, which gives it 15% critical chance and 30% multiplier on suppressive fire passively. And only Marksman has this. Meaning your suppressive fire will do crazy amount of damage. Then also Marksman at level 15 gets a passive that makes it regenerate 1 energy per second while you're in cover. Also, on level 43, you get the option to spec into any critical white hits restoring 2 energy. And those 3 things together make it so for AoE situations, you can basically spam suppressive fire, which will be your 1-button rotation. And just that alone can take you up above 25k DPS in the perfect game where everyone is stacking because the radius is so big. So it's really easy to get it off. You don't need to do a long dot spreading combo. The range is crazy. The only problem is that people might see that huge AoE that you're spamming on them because it actually does damage and then turn around and kill you since you're a sniper. But if they don't, the damage potential is insane. So I would put it on the second spot currently in A tier. Moving on to the first spot in A tier, I have the Lightning Sorcerer. Now, Lightning Sorcerer has been nerfed, but most of those nerfs were regarding its single target damage. I think when it comes to AoE games, Lightning still has the potential to do definitely more than 20k. I've seen that already. And in a perfect game, you could probably even hit more than 25k DPS on Lightning. Why is it so good? It's because of the elemental convection build that I already mentioned a little bit in the single target video. It makes it so that you can get 2 chain lightnings in a row. Basically, every rotation you will get 2 chain lightnings. They will refresh your affliction dot on all targets. They will root the enemies. And then you can spam Force Storm, for which you also have extra damage as lightning. So again, it's not a very complicated rotation. The damage potential is insane. Force Storm is easy to get off. It's not hard to do. The radius of the attack is pretty big. So lightning, for me, it's probably just a better version of Marksman. Also has better survivability, which is not really the point of this tier list. But yeah, the damage potential for lightning AoE is still insane. S tier, now the 2 best classes when it comes to AoE are, and I think everyone knows that, Lethality and Vengeance. Both of those specs have the potential to do more than 30k DPS, and I've seen that already. Now, if you rank them, I think it's a toss-up either way. I think in most games, Lethality will do more damage than Vengeance, but Vengeance has the higher potential overall. So actually, I think I would put Vengeance above Lethality, even though it's close. You can probably argue it either way. Yeah, like I said, I think probably in 9 out of 10 Warzones that you play, Lethality will do more damage. Actually, will do more damage than any spec when there's some AoE to do. But then there's one game where the enemies just stack perfectly. They have a lot of melee players. And then Vengeance can do more than 30k DPS. It can actually do more than 40k DPS. So Vengeance definitely has the higher ceiling. The only problem that Vengeance has is that it does too much damage in some cases, and so much damage that one healer just cannot heal it. So a problem that can hold you back for Vengeance is that you do so much damage that the enemy just dies, and then your DPS goes to shit. So yeah, Vengeance is at the top of the list. I don't think I really need to explain why Lethality is good, but I'll do it anyway. So yeah, Toxic Haze is, I think, the only 8-meter radius dot spread in the game left, which makes it really strong. With the Viral Elements Tactical, it also spreads your Toxic Blast, which is the dot amplifier. Lethality has 30-meter range on both of its dots, which makes it super easy to apply them before you spread them. And then finally, you have Lethal Strike, which just gives you an insane 30% crit chance and 30% crit multiplier on all of your dots, but then also Lethal Strike itself hits twice. And with the Viral Elements Tactical, it does an AOE to all enemies in your haze, so in your dot spread, which is just insane. I mean, I think only one of these things would be pretty good. 30% crit and multiplier, I think, is extremely overpowered. If it would be half that, would be still good. But yeah, all these things together make it so lethality is insane, clearly an S tier spec. And the only reason I rate Vengeance above it is cut to pieces and the insane one button slam spam rotation that it has that, can do 40, probably 50k DPS in this patch. So that's it. If you have any questions about this tier list or if you disagree with it, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.